First, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak, as well as hear all of the other speakers and the information that they're providing us. It's quite an enlightenment from just a little hydrogeologist. I wanted to point out, my name is Catherine Beinkafner. I have a PhD from Syracuse, and my original dissertation at Syracuse involved using thousands of well records from the state of New York. I went through all the files of DEC and built a database, and then I proceeded to map across the southern tier massive faults that seem to be related to décollement structures or sliding along the salt structures and then coming to the surface as faults and fractures, and some of them actually contain gas in the Bass Islands play, which happened to be developing right at the time I was studying all the records. Paul and I have been studying hydrofracking for about 4 years. When we first started out, there was very little information in the literature except for technical methodology of how to do fracking. There was hardly any information, or none virtually, about problems associated with contamination and migration. Paul and I had both been in the petroleum industry, and prior to my going into the industry, I worked at the Geological Survey here in Albany. And my first introduction to hydrofracking was as I worked as an oil and gas geologist at the New York Geological Survey. And at that time, they used water, sand, and walnut hulls to inject under high pressure to open these fractures. Things have changed a lot in the industry by moving to these contaminated types of fracking fluids. Also at that time, there were some injection projects jointly monitored between DEC and the Education Department, the Geological Survey, where we discovered that injecting chemicals under high pressure was not a good idea. And those projects were actually halted because in Colorado at the same time, there were similar projects dealing with military chemicals that were injected into the subsurface and causing micro-earthquakes. So Paul and I started looking for published literature. The first thing we came across was a 2002 paper by Robert Jacoby at the University of Buffalo. He's been studying fractures in New York State for 36 years. And he's got a map that when you look at the state on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, there's a lot of black just showing the lines where all these fractures, faults, and other vertical routes of conveyance for fluids exist in New York State. So here we are already, before we even start fracking, there are fractures. There's another pathway that's significant. All of the old wells that were drilled in the late 1800s, early 1900s, this is long before you needed a permit to drill a well. There's no real records of where all these wells were. So there are a lot of wells, even though DEC has a program to plug and abandon, there are a lot of wells that have never been found and never been plugged. So here are a whole another series of vertical conduits that can move contamination from depth to the surface. Let's see. But these are just before we even get to fracking. So when we get to fracking, then we're busy injecting these fluids under high pressures, and they're going to make more fractures, enlarge the network, increase the permeability, and raise the pressures to like 10,000 pounds per square inch. Now remember, you only put 30 pounds per square inch, or maybe 60 in your car or truck tires. So this is a lot of pressure. There's no way for these fluids to move downward. They can only move upward. So if you're pumping away and pushing this downward, it's got to come up. It's going to find the path of least resistance. You are going to have these fracking fluids and other gas and other fluids in the formation moving upward. I mean, why would we want to allow these chemicals to come to the surface and get into our freshwater aquifers and water supplies? It's insane. Let's see. The use of these toxic chemicals in fracking fluids and the potential for upward flow of contamination of aquifers and surface waters are reason to ban hydrofracking, at least to put a moratorium on it until we figure out if there is any way to actually get at this gas. But for now, I don't see there is a safe way to actually implement hydrofracking or any other form of injection of carbon dioxide or gas under high pressure. You're still going to be creating the same problem. Remember, you've got these radioactive elements in the Marcellus. Those are going to move upward also. And radioactivity is impossible to get out of water. We don't know how to do that. We'd just be creating something we can't see and something we don't know how to deal with it. So as citizens of New York, we implore the legislature to protect the water resources of the people of the state of New York.